Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, world leaders are gathering in Paris today to mark the second anniversary of the signing of the Paris Climate Agreement. But what is the agreement all about? Well, in December 2015, 196 countries reached a consensus in a deal that unites all the world's nations in a single agreement on tackling climate change. That ministers from 196 countries reached a consensus on a set of targets was hailed as historic in itself. The key elements of the agreement are to keep the rise in global temperatures well below 2 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial times and endeavour to limit them even more to 1.5 degrees centigrade. To limit the amount of greenhouse gases emitted by human activity to the same levels that trees, soil and oceans can absorb naturally, beginning at some point between 2050 and 2100. To review each country's contribution to cutting emissions every 5 years so they scale up to the challenge. For rich countries to help poorer nations by providing climate finance to adapt to climate change and switch to renewable energy. But during the 2016 United States presidential campaign, then candidate Donald Trump promised to withdraw the US, which contributes about 15% of the global emissions from carbon, from the agreement, saying the move would help the country's oil and coal industries. In June, President Trump confirmed that the US would withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord during a speech in the Rose Garden at the White House. He said that he was doing so to protect American jobs and the economy in the US. Well, today, French President Emmanuel Macron hosts a meeting in Paris of around 50 world leaders, from Mexican President Enrique Peña Nieto to Prime Minister Theresa May, for the One Planet Summit. President Trump was reportedly not invited. Actor and former Governor of California Arnold Schwarzenegger downplayed the US withdrawal from the climate accord yesterday, saying the rest of America would pick up the slack.
It doesn't matter that Donald Trump backed out of the Paris Agreement, because the private sector didn't drop out, the public sector didn't drop out, universities didn't drop out, scientists didn't drop out, engineers didn't drop out, no one dropped out. Donald Trump pulled Donald Trump out of the Paris Agreement, so don't worry about any of that. We, on a subnational level, we're going to pick up the slack and we're going to continue on.
Arnold Schwarzenegger there. Well, we're joined now from the Paris climate change talks by the Climate Change Minister, Claire Perry. Welcome to the programme. Thank you for joining us there from Paris. I don't know if you could hear Arnold Schwarzenegger just saying it doesn't matter that Donald Trump's not there because the private sector's going to pick up the tab and the slack. But is his absence overshadowing the conference, bearing in mind he is the world's second most polluting country represented at the table?
Well, it's a good question. The answer is not at all. And actually, what has happened both in the Conference of the Parties, where we spoke from Bonn a couple of weeks ago, and here today, is if anything, the Trump sort of headline withdrawal has reinvigorated other countries and big businesses and the big NGOs and the states and the cities to say, yeah, well, we get that. We don't, we think it's very disappointing, but all it does is mean we're going to go faster and do more. And the Prime Minister's coming out today, as you know. She's going to be making an announcement about the Powering Past Coal Alliance that I set up with Canada only 5 weeks ago. We hope we'd get 50 members by next year. We're over 50 already. She's going to be focusing on the first global electric vehicle summit we want to have in the UK. So I think in a way it's really sad and it's a shame, but Arnie is right. The rest of the country, the people who are actually creating the emissions, are getting on with the job of cutting them, because everyone sees it's good business. Not only is it good for the planet, but cutting our emissions is really good for the economy. We've got almost 500,000 people in Britain working in this low carbon sector. So it's about jobs and growth, which is obviously something that the President of the US cares about.
Right.
So I hope he can come back to the party, but even without him, we will get on and do the job.
All right, but is it all about the money, Claire Perry? Because in the end, if it's about richer countries helping poorer polluting countries to adjust their economies, to move to renewables, the World Bank president said it will take between $3 and $5 trillion a year for 30 years to contain the rise in global temperatures. Should Britain be committing more funds?
Well, we are one of the largest donors of climate finance, Joe. But of course, what's exciting is if you look at what's happening with the cost of renewable technology, it's now being delivered subsidy-free. So I opened Britain's first subsidy-free solar farm just a few weeks ago. Our latest auction bought offshore wind at a price unimaginably low only a couple of years ago, now competitive with fossil fuels. So the world is moving very rapidly to a place where renewables are not a cost trade-off. They're actually lower cost in many cases and better for the environment. But we have got to work together. And one of the things I've been saying, and the Prime Minister, what I think will say, is we can't solve this problem alone. There's huge benefits in collaborating in technology and working together, and we need to make sure that that is accelerated. And, President Macron had a big dinner last night where he kicked off the summit, and he made this amazing point. He said, I don't want to say to my children in 50 years' time, when we've lost Fiji and the Marshall Islands because of sea level rises, we knew it was going to happen and we didn't act. And I think there's a real sense of kind of commitment and optimism here, and a lot of hard work to do. But remember, Britain is leading the pack. We've cut our emissions more and grown our economy more than any other G7 nation. So we know how to do it at home.
Right.
We've still got more to do, and we absolutely want to be there helping the world with this challenge.
But how committed is the British government? Because, the commitment to climate change was questioned when Theresa May abolished the Department for Energy and Climate Change shortly after taking office last year. So it's been sort of demoted.
Not at all. No, I have to disagree, Joe. So we're one of the first countries in the world that has a binding Climate Change Act. Next year's the 10th anniversary. And if you want politicians to do the right thing over a consistent period of time, having that piece of legislation is really, really good. And other countries want to do the same thing. And actually, by putting DEC, as it was called, the Department for Energy and Climate Change, into the business department, we've done something which is incredibly important, which is to say, as we want our economy to grow and prosper, we know that this clean growth thing has to be at the heart of it. So, we're working far more closely with British businesses, with the British financial sector, to say, how do we really make this change happen? So I don't think it's a demotion. I think it's a promotion for the area. And again, look around us. People are coming up to us saying, Britain has really led the world in this space. Well, you cut your emissions fast. You're employing hundreds of thousands of people. Let's do it together. And we should actually be proud, Joe, of what we've done. And
let's have a look at some of the domestic policies that the government's undertaken, because the Chancellor's announced in the budget that fuel duty would be frozen again, keeping the tax the same for the longest period in 40 years. Why was the planned rise scrapped? I mean, doesn't that sort of indicate and undermine Philip Hammond's other announcements on a plastic tax and clean air commitments?
Well, and it's great that you spotted those, because it's not just about air, it's about sea quality and water quality as well. But no, because actually what he also did was he put in a new tax level for the most polluting vehicles, the diesel engines, many of which people were encouraged to buy by previous governments. And he also committed several $100 million for building out the world's best electric vehicle charging network. So look, Joe, to me, you have to do this in a structured way. You have to invest in technologies that cut emissions. You have to make sure you're not putting costs up for consumers, and you have to create technology that we can export around the world. So I think it was actually a very measured budget, and you can see Britain now is making 1 in 5 of the electric vehicles that are being sold in Europe. We've got a really fast take-up of electric vehicles, and as I said, the PM will be announcing this global EV summit, because we want to be both driving them and making them in the UK.
But Claire Perry, it is about action, isn't it? It's not just about the rhetoric, and you have pointed to some of the announcements that have been made.
Absolutely.
But the High Court has found that the government's previous attempts to cut air pollution, for example, were so poor as to be illegal. The government has said it won't introduce more clean air zones to charge the most polluting vehicles to enter the UK's most polluted cities. Why not?
Well, I think actually if you read what the budget said, it said this new diesel levy will go directly into clean air funding. And it is about action, Joe. So, look, we will be not burning any coal to produce power by 2025. Our proportion of energy coming from renewables is about 25%. We are actually delivering on our promises, and we've got lots more to do. And it has to be done in a way that doesn't put up costs. But as I said, the new technology that we're bringing on is now effectively the same cost as some of the fossil fuel technology. technologies. But there is always more to do, and that's why I think getting out there, and it's great that you're covering this. This is, I think, probably one of the first live broadcasts done from a climate change summit.
Oh, hooray.
We have to get out there and say to people, this is not some, hooray, this isn't some win-lose trade-off where we have to knuckle down for the sacrificial future. We can save the planet and we can boost British businesses at the same time, and also work with, as you say, hundreds of other countries who are here, many of them represented by heads of state today, who want to work collectively. So it's a big moment. It's challenging. I'm not suggesting it's all going to be easy, but it's great to see Britain's leadership here today.
All right. Well, enjoy the summit and the conference. Richard Madeley,
thank you. Sun's shining.
Do you feel that there is ongoing commitment, enough ongoing commitment by this government to actually meet some of the challenges? I mean, despite what Claire Perry says about meeting some of the targets on cutting emissions, future targets, and I'm talking quite a long way into the future, don't look to be online.
No, this isn't my specialist subject by any means, but the impression that I have actually is quite positive. I thought Claire gave a very good performance there, actually. I thought she explained quite genuinely the commitment that's coming from the government. And
despite the fact they don't have a cabinet minister anymore.
Yes, absolutely, but I thought she dealt with that quite well. I thought her defence of that was quite strong. No, I'm quite comfortable with Britain's stance on global warming. I think that we're ahead of the pack in many ways. I think she's right, and I think that other countries do look up to us to set an example. I mean, as things stand, we're ahead of America, which isn't a bad place to be after what Trump said. So no, I'm not pessimistic actually about our approach to it. I think it's patchy, obviously, but I think on the whole our heart's in the right place, and I think our intentions are good.
Let's leave it there.
Now, it is exactly 2 years to the day since the nations of the world signed the Paris Climate Accord to limit man-made temperature rises to 2 degrees Celsius. It's an agreement Donald Trump has said that the United States of America would now duck out of. So step forward Emmanuel Macron. France's president has looked beyond politics to host a summit with some of the biggest beasts of the global business world, and seemingly with some success. It means that Mr. Macron finds himself centre stage on global warming now that the United States has vacated it. Our science editor, Tom Clark, has this report.
Wow, look at this.
The Southern California wildfires have been some of the largest and most costly in history. And when wildfires threaten Hollywood, you can expect drama. Nearly 6,000 miles away in Paris, 2 of its stars joined business giants to lend weight to tackling climate change. The event, the One Planet Summit, was convened by France's President Emmanuel Macron.
On est en train de perdre la bataille.
We are losing the battle. Let's not fool ourselves. We're having a good time. Everything is great because we're meeting again, and a lot of people here appreciate each other or are meeting for the first time, and it may seem like a nice moment, but we are losing the battle.
The battle is not just delivering on the climate change commitments made at the summit here in Paris in 2015, but going way beyond them. The world currently produces about 52 billion tonnes of greenhouse gases a year. On current trends, by 2030, it'll be nearly 60 billion tonnes. To meet the minimum 2-degree temperature target set out in Paris, emissions have to fall at least as far as this. But emissions-cutting measures countries signed up to there leave us still producing around 10 to 15 billion tonnes too much each year. This summit is an environmental rally, but also a political play by Mr. Macron. He said he believes Donald Trump will sign up to the Paris Agreement, but in the meantime, he's trying to fill the leadership vacuum left by Mr. Trump's coal-digging administration of denial. Swapping wildfire for a boat on the Seine, California's Governor Jerry Brown appeals to Mr. Macron to work on Mr. Trump.
You're going to have to push Trump a little bit.
I'm sure, but you are the one. It seems that you are the one to push him.
I am pushing him.
I pushed him. I did my best.
There are more than 50 world leaders at the summit. Our PM announced more aid money for adapting to climate change and her own zero-carbon vehicle summit.
Well, tackling climate change is one of the great challenges that we face, but also mitigating the impact of climate change on some of the poorest countries in the world. And what we're doing in the United Kingdom by phasing out coal, but by the work we're doing for our world-leading electric cars, for example, is showing that we can actually deal with the issue of emissions, we can reduce emissions, but that can also be of benefit done in a way that is of benefit to the economy.
But this meeting isn't really about politics, but getting climate change down to business. Today, the World Bank insurance giant AXA and Dutch bank ING announced they'd move investment away from oil, gas and coal. Exxon gave in to investor demands to publish the environmental risks of its activities.
What's going to make the difference in people's lives is what happens in the real economy. What we've seen is the financial community getting into this game because they've understood the level of risk if we don't deal with climate change, and they're beginning to see massive opportunities in actually getting on with the job of dealing with it.
So 2 years on from Paris, today's announcements are meaningful. But we're 2 years closer to the fast approaching point at which it becomes impossible to avoid 2 degrees of warming.
Tom Clark reporting.
Now, tomorrow will mark 2 years since the world agreed a historic deal on tackling climate change in Paris. And all this week on News at 10, we are looking at what, if any, progress has been made in delivering on it. You probably recall all this, but the Paris Agreement was signed by 195 countries. They pledged to limit the rise in the world's overall temperature to less than 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. It'll come into effect in 2020, but in June this year, President Trump withdrew America from it, despite the fact that 2016 was the warmest year on record, with global temperatures nearly 1 degree above 19th century levels. And President Trump's vocal support for coal is fueling a debate about whether it can ever be clean.
In the 2 years since the Paris Agreement on climate change, America has been enduring what appears to be ever more extreme weather. From the fires currently ravaging California to hurricanes and extreme flooding, the debate is intensifying over whether these wildly fluctuating patterns can be attributed to a warming planet. One of the primary culprits driving rising temperatures is carbon dioxide, one of the greenhouse gases. And 40% of global CO2 emissions come from the burning of coal. And so News at 10 travelled to what they call the energy capital of America, Northeast Wyoming. Remote, but coal-rich. In fact, these are the biggest surface coal mines in the United States. And while many condemn the burning of coal as inherently polluting, here the workers say they're in the business of innovation, trying to rebrand their industry in an age of environmental anxiety.
We really hope that Wyoming becomes sort of the Silicon Valley of carbon control technologies.
Adjacent to the Dry Fork Power Station is a test center, where they're trying to improve techniques to capture CO2 before it reaches the atmosphere.
This is just an engineering challenge. It shouldn't be this political hurdle and this political argument that it has become. And so we figure if we can find this technology challenge, that ensures coal is viable long into the future.
Essentially, they are attempting to give meaning to what the industry calls clean coal. What coal miners have in their favor is a president who is their biggest cheerleader, who is moving in the opposite direction to the rest of the world.
We're going to put the miners back to work. We're going to put the miners back to work.
Alone, he is turning his back on the Paris climate deal.
So what can we do now proactively?
Wyoming's governor disagrees with that, but says it would be wrong to keep 6 billion tons of coal in the ground, and that improvements will come in time.
But, you know, when Henry Ford was first making automobiles, if we said you got to have an airbag, you've got to have the self-driving, you know, it would kill the industry. So I think the industry is ready to go in a direction to continue to make improvements, but the only way you get there is to have them in the business. If you shut them down in an academic world, you're never going to find these solutions.
There's no such thing as clean coal.
But those who advocate for a better energy mix for the environment say they're fighting those who often deny basic climate science.
I think it's absurd. I think that fossil fuels will, in some places, continue to be a part of the energy mix, and so we need to think about realistically how do we, reduce and remove the emissions from those sources. But they're on their way out. We have the future of our grid in the US and of energy globally is zero carbon.
Wyoming is the state where the great western landscape meets the coal industry, and where capturing carbon emissions may be the only path to a viable economy. Robert Moore, News at 10, in the United States.
Now, there was a bit of a climate change reunion, I guess you could say. In Paris today, 50 world leaders were marking the 2-year anniversary of the historic Paris Agreement. President Trump was not among them, of course. He pulled America out of the deal in June. Theresa May was there, though. She used the occasion to announce new British commitments to climate causes, including £15 million for reconstruction efforts in Dominica, devastated by Hurricane Maria in September. There'll also be £87 million to support poor communities fighting against illegal logging worldwide, all part of a £140 million fund to help developing countries cope with the effects of climate change. One place trying and failing to cope is the delta between India and Bangladesh. In the second of our series, to mark Paris 2 years on, we report on how livelihoods and homelands are being lost there to rising sea levels.
For most of us, the effects of global warming are notional. For the village of Bina Pani, they were terminal. This place was home to more than 500 people, but a year ago the sea got in and the salt water killed the place. You know it happened recently because a few of the palm trees are somewhere between life and death, a reminder of the lushness that was here, but is now lost forever, consumed by rising sea levels. We are on a journey through the Sundarban, the world's largest mangrove forest. This is the Indian side of a huge wilderness shared with Bangladesh. It is through this delta that 3 big rivers, including the Ganges, flow into the Bay of Bengal. Famous as a wildlife sanctuary and a reserve for the elusive Bengal tiger, the Sundarban is also home to more than 4 million people who are watching their homeland vanish.
Gradually the land is eroding and embankment is dropped out, and some places are submerged. So this is happening. This is a very alarming call to the Sundarban people.
The islands are ringed by embankments, behind which are some idyllic and flourishing communities. This is a land of rice paddies and lotus ponds that right now look doomed. The culprit is a hotter world causing warming of the water in the relatively shallow Bay of Bengal. Sea levels here are rising by 9 millimeters annually. The result is erosion that's killing off the mangroves that are the first and most important line of defense. With the mangroves unable to defend the land from the sea on their own, man-made defences were put in, but in truth they're failing as well. The path I'm standing on is getting narrower by the day, and in the not too distant future, this beautiful place will be lost, consumed by the sea to become part of the Bay of Bengal. What's going to happen to the people living on this island behind you?
They have to migrate somewhere, or they have to find habitation elsewhere. There are a lot of things being told about the climate refugees, the environmental refugees, but the government has not yet any concrete policy regarding that.
When it comes to global warming, India is both victim and villain. In Delhi of late, dense smog has caused major disruption and forced people to inhale the equivalent of 40 cigarettes a day. It hardly bodes well for the future of the Sundarban and all who live here. The end of this way of life isn't a prospect, it's a slow, steady reality happening right now before our eyes. Through no fault of their own, their world is disappearing beneath their feet. John Irvine, News at 10, in the Sundarban.